Everybody talks about what happened last cycle, but what if you weren't around last cycle and didn't experience last cycle? You don't know what they're talking about. You don't know where their point of view comes from. You know, what happened in 2018's bear market? What started last bull run? These are all questions that I'm going to be answering in this video. Before I get into that, guys, I just want to say, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button for me. If you are a returning subscriber and already subscribed, I wish you a very prosperous next cycle. Now, if you hit that button, that wish goes to you as well. Okay, so 2018 was the first bear market I had ever experienced in crypto. I got started in crypto. It was late 2016. So that was my first bull run, and I fell victim to a lot of traps that had re-emerged in this most recent cycle. And with that, I think there's a lot of knowledge that I brought from last cycle and that bear market that helped me a ton in this cycle. So if you experienced this full last cycle, then even if you made mistakes, you probably learned a ton, and it's going to help you a lot come next bull market. There's probably a lot of projects that you learn to steer clear from, red flags, things like that. And those red flags, while some of them have changed, most of them were around last cycle, and that's what I want to talk about, as well as where the opportunity lies come next bull run. So what started the whole 2016-17 bull market was that Ethereum was semi-operational, and so new tokens were able to launch on Ethereum, or at least talk about launching on Ethereum. So we saw that with a ton of them. They all came out. It was the Ico Boom. There were a ton of projects that promised the world but had no working products, and so information was very minimal at the time. You could, there was only a few people to follow. You had to follow pretty much everybody on Twitter and hope that they were giving you accurate information. Otherwise, there wasn't necessarily the news networks that we have now. Yes, there were a few that were around, but they weren't as in-depth as they are now, and they didn't follow things as closely or, again, as in-depth. So when that Ico Boom started, all of the charts looked pretty much like this. It was pretty much just a pump and dump scheme everywhere you went. You had to hope you caught it at the right time, but there wasn't really any value behind these tokens because the projects weren't active. You had a couple big major projects that came out that are still around that were pretty much proven to be pump and dump schemes, Tron being a big one. Yes, Tron does have an operational, chain, but it is nowhere near Ethereum level. But there's a lot of accusations that Justin Sun dumped a lot of tokens on retail. Now, not all of them were like that. A lot of the tokens that came out were retail kind of pump and dumped on themselves, right? Because after a while, people started to see the charts. They tried to time it so that they could catch the major spike, and you maybe had like an hour to sell at that point, and everyone would start selling, and it would just drive the price right back down, and then it was on to the next token. So that is how last cycle went for the most part. That was the bull run. And when you're looking at the majors, when you're looking at Bitcoin, Ethereum, it does look like a pretty good bull run. Litecoin was super popular at the time, but all of the ICOs, the little projects, it was like nearly impossible to catch it on. If the team wasn't dumping on you, the rest of retail was. So, and again, you had no information, so you're totally going into this blind. Nobody has working projects, so you can't use or test anything, which was a major problem. So like even Eth Lend, which is now Aave, didn't have really a working product at the time. So you had no way to differentiate what teams were telling you the truth and which ones were telling you, straight up lies and weren't doing anything behind the scenes to build their project. And a common theme that happened then and has happened again this cycle is your Eth competitors, right? Everyone is trying to replace ETH. That was the same thing then. You had EOS, you had Tron, and I forget the others, but there was a bunch of others that came out that were supposed to be chains that were going to rival Ethereum and their smart contracts. Ethereum at the time had a lot more funding, which is a big difference between that cycle and this cycle. There wasn't the same VC involvement that cycle that there is now. So a lot of these teams, they didn't have a lot of capital to work with, and they need to pay the bills just like everybody else does. So a lot of these teams, even if they had a good vision, didn't necessarily have the funding to continue going through the bear market because VCs were not there to inject money into the bear market. So I know a lot of us, don't like VCs, but they do bring value in that way, guys. They allow VCs allow for teams to access funding without dumping their tokens on retail investors. While yes, sometimes they still do anyway. Most of them are under lockup periods and things like that. So that is a big difference. So we got information was a big difference, and we also have the VC involvement is a big difference. Similarities are L1 competitors, so Eth Competitors. Now this cycle, I will say, Eth Competitors were a lot more built up than they were previous cycles. Previous cycles, almost nobody had a working chain. Ethereum had a chain, but it was not fully functioning like the Ethereum we know today. You basically couldn't really launch anything on top of it yet. But now this cycle, your AVAXs, Solana, these projects have working chains with projects on top of them. So again, they're building their ecosystems. Tron and all those tokens, they didn't really have an ecosystem at the time. So anyways, guys, that's the similarities and differences between the Eth Competitors. A lot of them now seem a bit more legit. They actually have working products, and they have a lot more funding. So again, this cycle, the access to information is the biggest, and funding is the biggest differences between then and now. At that time, there was also a lot of I call them noob traps, okay, which are the tokens that attract a lot of new investors. They take all their money, they spend it on marketing, and that marketing is very enticing to new investors when there is no other information in the space. So back then, it was really easy to fall victim to these traps. Not that it wasn't easy this cycle. We saw that with a lot of different projects where it was easy to get involved. However, they offered more sustained runs this cycle than they did previous cycles. So like your Doges, you think, again, no knock on Doge, but its bull cycle lasted a lot longer than some of the traps of last cycle, which again were just teams that spent a ton of money on marketing, and that marketing was easy to find information, and so new investors flocked towards it. And once you get new investors in and you build a community, that community then reaches out to other people to try to get them to buy the token, and so the community expands, and again it just becomes more and more of a trap. You had the biggest one was Verge. That was one that I was involved in, that I invested in because there's lots of marketing on it. I thought it was the next big thing. Anonymity was like a big focus of the time, but really it was just a trap. They spent a lot of money on marketing and less money and time on the team, which was a fatal flaw of that project. While yes, it's still around, it's not near the value that it was at the time. So again, that's a common repeating pattern that we'll see probably next cycle as well. That's just what it is. But if you take your knowledge that you learned and gained this cycle and apply it to next cycle, you'll learn to steer clear of a lot of these things. And this kind of goes to a point I have where, when you look at like Kobe on Twitter, this is a guy that's been in crypto since almost the beginning. He goes out and he just speaks honestly. He tells you what to be careful for or of. He tells you what projects he's skeptical of. And while he gets a lot of hate for that, there's a lot that you can take away from that. If you can take a step back and not join the cults of these projects and learn to look at your investments with a skeptical eye, that is a good thing, okay? Listen to these people who have been in the space for eons, because they're not doing this because they hate your project. They're doing this because they themselves made the same mistake and they don't want other people to make their mistakes. And Kobe is very vocal about him making pretty much every mistake in the book, and so all he is doing is speaking from experience, and this is very valuable to be able to tap into information like that. So definitely listen to these people, because it helps out a lot. And yes, I know there's a lot of people out there who also act like they know everything but maybe don't, so it's important to look at people's track records. So what can we do with this information when we look at the repeating patterns from last cycle to this cycle? Well, I think that we can assume that a lot of these things are going to happen next cycle as well, and use them to our advantage. The very cliche saying, history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. And that's what we've been seeing. So looking for what areas rhyme come next cycle, I think is going to help a ton. We're probably going to see new ETH L1 competitors coming out. they're probably going to do pretty well in the beginning. You're probably going to see NFT projects explode. That's been the big one that started this cycle that is likely going to continue next cycle. NFTs, metaverse, gaming. These are going to be common themes that I think are going to carry through. And you're going to see the big marketing schemes. Now, the projects with the big marketing schemes always have generally one massive run, and that is it. There's typically never a second one. And it's because once you get a bunch of retail piled on, even if the project is good, eventually retail, new retail gets very skittish and they just start dumping on each other. So that's something that we will probably see come next cycle. What I'd also pay attention to is ecosystem development. So, ETH was the big L1 that started last cycle that blew up to the ETH we know now. And what did we see this cycle? Lots of development on Ethereum. We saw lots of DeFi projects, lots of NFT projects get developed on Ethereum. So what I'm predicting is that next cycle, the L1s that came out this cycle that had started their ecosystem, but maybe things weren't getting built up as much, or they were just kind of surface level. You're on Solana, on Cosmos, on AVAX. These chains didn't really have time to really develop a good ecosystem, and I think that we're going to see, this bear market's going to wash out a lot of the crap projects that we're just trying to, get newbie money involved. And so those projects are going to go away. And then next cycle, you'll start to see these ecosystems really blossom. And so that's what I'm going to be looking for. Again, a lot like Ethereum, you're going to probably see a lot of that next cycle. So again, guys, a recap of 2018. In a lot of ways, it was very similar, minus the funding, minus the information. So, these projects, once it hit the bear market, most of them were pump and dumps. They just flatlined, and the good ones returned this cycle. So the good ones, their tokens turned around. Your chain links, your big projects, Ethereum, Bitcoin, turned around with this cycle. The ones that didn't provide value died off. They no longer exist as we know them today, or as we knew them in that cycle. And yes, you still had your Ponzi schemes like your BitConnects. I think you can relate BitConnect a lot to something like Hex. And I know there's lots of Hex people out there that are haters, but it's literally a Ponzi scheme. It's the whole thing is relying upon new money coming in, more new money coming in than what is being extracted from the project. So we'll probably see another Ponzi recreation next cycle as well. So if you are interested in continuing the conversation of how to predict next cycle's gems using information from the previous cycle and what my plan is, what projects I have an eye out for, check out this video right here. Again, it's going to be a nice continuation of this video. So I hope this helped you guys out. If it did, please, again, like and subscribe to the video, and I will catch you guys next time.